On page 6, 7, and 6, 8 notes, we are going to be adding one more exponent rule, and this is a negative exponent rule. So we cannot have negative exponents as a final answer. So if you have a negative exponent, you need to move that down to the bottom of a fraction, and that's what makes it positive. So x to the negative a becomes 1 over x to the positive a. So we're going to do 1 through 3 and then just the even ones on this video. So your first one for number 1 is simply 1 over x to the 5th. If you think about it, there's an invisible 1 in front of the x. So the 1 stays put and the x to the 5th goes to the bottom. Number 2, don't write this yet. Most people think this becomes 1 over 3m squared. That is not correct. The 3 does not have a negative exponent, so the 3 stays put and only m squared goes to the bottom. So if you look at number 1 and number 2, number 1 technically has a 1 in front, that's why it stays on the top, and number 2 has a 3 in front, so that's why it stays on the top. Number 3 is especially confusing because it's a negative 7. However, that is just a plain number. So your negative 7 stays on the top and your b to the 3rd stays on the top because it's positive. Your a to the 4th goes to the bottom. So one kind of hint I have is as soon as you see negative exponents, draw yourself a fraction bar and then decide which terms need to go to the top and which ones need to go on the bottom. So we're going to do the even ones. So we're going to use our rules first, and then we will do the negative. So when we are multiplying, remember we add our exponents. So that becomes w to the negative 2. So then our new rule says we need to move negative x to the bottom. So negative exponents to the bottom. So 1 over w to the positive 2. So you want to do all of your regular rules first, and then if you have a negative exponent, your last step would be to move that. So if we look at number 6, we have 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. We add our exponents to give us x to the negative 11. So again, as soon as you see a negative exponent, write yourself a fraction bar. Your negative 18 stays on the top. Your x to the 11th goes to the bottom. Only negative exponents go to the bottom. I'm going to show you 2 ways that you could do number 8. The first thing you could do is use our regular rule where you do 8 to the negative 2. Now that is going to give you a decimal, so you need to make sure you are able to change that to a fraction. 8 to the negative 2 should become 1 over 64, not negative 64, 1 over 64. And then we would have p to the negative 10. So we're going to write that as one big fraction, 1 over 64 p to the 10th. So that's one way you can do it. I'm going to do another one off to the side. If you have an entire set of parentheses to a negative exponent, you can actually move that to the bottom. So we could rewrite this as 1 over 8p to the 5th to the positive 2nd power. So again, anything to a negative exponent goes down. So if you have a whole set of parentheses to a negative, you can move that to the bottom. So then we leave our 1 on the top. 8 squared is 64. We multiply our exponents to get p to the 10th. So either way, you will get the same answer. So we can do that same thing for number 10. So if we stick to our first rule, we would do 3 to the negative 4, which should give you 1 over 81. Again, it will give you a decimal, so you need to know how to change your decimal to a fraction. And then we would have r to the negative 4 and s to the positive 12. So then draw your big fraction bar. Your 81 is already down there, so it stays. Your r is a negative exponent, so that moves to the bottom to become r to the positive 4. And your s to the 12 has to stay on the top. If you did the second way, you would have 1 over 3rs to the negative third to the positive fourth. So you still, that negative 3 doesn't change. You're moving that down to the bottom. So then you have 1 over 81r to the fourth, s to the negative 12. That's why your final answer then, the s to the negative 12 would have to go back up to the top. So if you have a negative exponent on the bottom, it needs to move back up to the top to become a positive exponent. Number 12, when we divide, we subtract. So we would get h to the negative 3. So our final answer for that one would be 1 over h to the positive 3. Again, division. 14 divided by 7 is 2. W to the positive 6. 4 minus negative 2 is positive 6. So that one's just done because there are no negative exponents. Number 16. 36 divided by 12 is 3. We would keep our x to the negative fourth because there's no other x's, and y to the positive 1. If you want to put a 1, you can, but you don't need to. So then draw your fraction bar. Your 3 and your y stay on the top, and then x to the positive 4 on the bottom. Number 18. Negative 4 over 8 is going to simplify to negative 1/2. P to the negative 1. Positive 1 minus 2 would give you negative 1. Q to the third, and r to the negative 7. So then we're going to have one big fraction bar. We need to have a negative. You can either put it out in front or you can put it on the top. You do not put it in the bottom. You technically can write a 1 on the top, but you don't need to. But the q to the third stays on the top. The 2 is on the bottom, p to the positive 1, r to the positive 7. Now we have some addition and subtraction. So with addition, remember you need to have your exponents match completely. So I'm just going to do it this way. 4 to the negative 2 is 1 over 16. You can think 4 squared is 16, but since it's a negative exponent, it has to go to the bottom. So that's why it's 1 over 16. X to the negative 6, y to the negative 12. Plus 2 to the negative third is 1 over 8. X to the negative 6, y to the negative 12. So you're going to have 1/16 plus 1/8, which would give you 3/16. And then you still have x to the negative 6, y to the negative 12. So you still need to write that without negative exponents. Hopefully you'll be able to skip that step and say, okay, 3's on the top, 16's on the bottom. The x to the 6th and the y to the 12th also have to go to the bottom because they're both negative. (21), we start by multiplying the top together. 6 times 5 is 30, a to the 12th. So we multiply our coefficients and we add our exponents over negative 12a to the 14th. So 30 over negative 12 simplifies to negative 5 over 2. And then we would have a to the negative 2 when we subtract. So our final answer, we're going to have negative 5 on the top and then 2a squared on the bottom. Again, you can either put your negative up top with the 5, or if you want, you can always put it out in front, but just do not ever put it on the bottom. (24) Negative 6 squared is positive 36. X to the 8th, y to the 12th. So again, not 6 times 2, but negative 6 times negative 6. Negative 6 squared is positive 36. And then we multiply our exponents. Negative 4 to the 3rd is negative 64. We would have x to the negative 9, y to the 15. So 36 over negative 64 simplifies to negative 9 over 16. We would have x to the 17th. 8 minus negative 9 is positive 17. And then we would have y to the negative 3. So our final answer, your negative 9 and your x to the 17th would stay on the top. 16 y to the 3rd would be on the bottom. And our challenge problem. You need to start on the very inside. So that's going to be right here. 2 to the negative 2 would be 1/4. X to the negative 8, y to the 6th. Times, so that set is gone. Now we're going to do this one. 2 to the 4th is 16. X to the negative 4, y to the negative 8. So I'm going to put all of that together first. So I would get 4x to the negative 12, y to the negative 2. So that's just the top of my very inside fraction. We have that over 2x to the negative 7, y to the negative 3. That whole thing then is to the 3rd power. But it's much easier to simplify the whole inside before you take it to the 3rd power. So I'm going to simplify that over here. 4 divided by 2 is 2. We would have x to the negative 5. Negative 12 minus negative 7 would give you negative 5. And then y to the positive 1. Negative 2 minus negative 3 is positive 1. All of that is to the 3rd power. So 2 to the 3rd is 8. Then we multiply to get x to the negative 15, y to the positive 3. So your final answer, the 8 and the y to the 3rd would stay on the top. Your x to the 15th would go to the bottom. So just take it nice and slow, one little part at a time, and then simplify.